We'll call this meeting to order. Thank you, Mr. Hemholt, for the last-minute adjustments per my request first thing this morning. No Mr. Glass, or?
Nope, you got just me.
That's good. Okay, take it away. Seeing no public, go ahead.
All right, first on just legislative updates. Really what we're hearing mostly, the two big things that we're hearing again are the pension reform and the electric choice. Those are the two that seem to have the most likelihood of being taken up. Again, there are no bills officially that we're tracking yet. We anticipate that they'll drop those the first week that session is back. There are 3 weeks of lame duck sessions, and we're going to continue to really monitor it closely. Obviously, that's why we wanted to finalize this platform today, bring it to the full board tonight for their approval. We can always come back and make adjustments, but I don't think there's really anything in here that's really altogether much different than what your position has been in the past. This just gives us a little bit more guidance as to how we approach the lame duck session. So not much more to report. I mean, this is the end of the session, so any legislation that we were tracking before is going to have to die and be reintroduced. There was a package of bills that I know Elizabeth Welsh had brought up, with that callback around school choice and vouchers, and we do not anticipate seeing that this lame duck. However, it's important to know that the House majority is even more conservative in the new session that's upcoming than it was in the current one. And so, there are new dynamics in play. I think at one point we had even talked a little bit about rumblings of this grand bargain potential that with the Governor's 21st Century Commission being prepared to release their report, which everything that we've seen and heard is really pretty substantive work. In this legislature, we're not sure that's when that bargain's going to occur. So, again, what our role come post lame duck in the new session is going to be building relationships with the new chairs of the committees, and looking at relationships with the state school board, because you had two new members there, including John Austin is no longer on the board. So we are going to have our work cut out for us this next legislative session, and we certainly are going to have work cut out for us during lame duck. So with that said, why don't we get into the platform, if that's okay? And I'm just going to kind of go page by page and kind of trying to highlight the changes from the last draft that you saw. First of all, I have Ms. Schottky listed correctly, not as David LeGrand, but as Jen Schottky. And then under the guiding principles, we did shift the first bullet point on your new draft was actually bullet point 2, and we wanted to move that one up to really put emphasis on that. That's really part of our driving principles, that we really do want the state to be a top 10 in the nation for student achievement, and looking at an inclusive statewide platform for setting these priorities. And it shouldn't be on the extremes, that we really need to work together to find that good, high quality legislation that's reflective of and serves all children. Other than that, no changes to those guiding principles. Unless you want me to go through them, I'm going to keep going. On the new funding formula, top legislative priorities, page 2, new funding formula, School Aid Act rewrite. Here is where we added language. If you look at the bullet points under the Michigan Education Finance Study, we added the specific dollar amounts so that we can quantify what this means. Specifically, when the study recommended a weight for ELL students at 0.3,
That's awesome.
and for 0.4, 0.3 for at-risk and 0.4 for
That's
ELL.
awesome, Don. Nice
You're
work.
looking at an additional 2,253 for at-risk youth and 3,004 for ELL. And right now, our 31A dollars, which we'd had a $100 million increase statewide last year, is still only weighted at that 0.11. So you can really see the difference between what's being recommended as an adequacy at 0.3 and we're at 0.1. And so we're hoping that the governor and his budget recommendations will continue to drive at this. We have certainly every indication to think that he might, certainly based on what we're seeing and hearing out of the commission, as well as just kind of rumblings. Of course, the downside is that the state, had to take money from general fund last year to the tune of more than $200 million for the school aid. And so, the dollars are tight. So we're kind of holding our breath to see what ability the legislature and the governor will have to possibly not only increase per pupil funding, but also potentially increase the at-risk youth funding.
Can you educate me a little bit? 0.3, 0.4, 0.11. I mean, obviously I know what those mean, but that's in relation to what? 0.3
To the 7,511.
So-
So
so
30%, 7,511 times 30%.
All right,
That's
yeah,
where
that's
that,
what that's what. Okay.
the good question, I asked the exact same thing. I said, what does that mean? So,
So then we're saying that we're advocating that that for at-risk population, an additional 30% of that 7511 is what we figure it costs
and
to
beyond,
appropriately
yep.
educate,
yep.
Right.
We're getting about $826 per pupil.
which is 0.11.
Right, for 31A at risk. This would bump it up to 2,253. And then that would be, according to this study, this independent, bipartisan, bicameral study, would say that that's an adequate amount to meet the needs based on what we know is required to service those students.
And what are we getting for ELL students?
It's single digits.
Yeah,
It's 1.1 or 1.2 million statewide between all
Yeah.
districts. And so I don't have that right in front of me, but
Yeah.
it is single, it's like $6 per kid or something. It's a
I
really
wonder if
small.
it'd be worthwhile to even mention that in there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so, just because you put what we're getting currently, yeah,
Mhm.
by comparison.
Okay. Other than that, yeah, that was really it. That was the main part. There were a couple of minor typos. I did move, you'll see me move the retirement reform up. I know this is not listed in any order, but we figure right now, if they're gonna go through them, we're gonna move that one to the top. Retirement reform. What we did here was, really move, you might recall, we had those 4 bullet points that we added. This is essentially your exact same position as last year, with the exception of adding that last sentence that says, given the complexities of retirement reform and the potential short and long-term fiscal impacts to the state budget, school district, and school employees, the board maintains that any consideration of retirement reform must be done so in the most transparent, thorough, and deliberative way and should not be done during lame duck session. So we took those bullet points out and replaced this with very clear language that says that the legislature should not try and just push this through in a 3-week session without having all the facts, all the details, and a thorough debate of the merits and the rationale behind what makes the most sense for those current employees, future employees. How do we retain and attract the best talent? How do we ensure that we have a system that honors the profession and honors the commitments that were made by the state to those very individual employees? We know that by and large, we've heard from our friends in the legislature that they are not intending to go after current benefits, that if they were to go look at a 401k system, would be for new employees. Your previous bullet points originally said that, any retirement reform would need an attractive 401k style that would recruit and retain the best talent. The retirement contribution rates and the cost of a 401k style benefit for new employees do not exceed the current amounts paid by districts. Pension benefits earned for existing employees are kept intact and unaltered for the duration of the employment and retirement, and any savings from this altered system would go back to the schools. We've just taken that information out and put a very clear message that we recognize that there's the need for further look at our retirement system and how we can improve it and make it more sustainable. It is going to require additional state investment over a long period of time. But doing kind of a knee-jerk flip of legislation that has had less than 3 weeks of deliberation is not prudent at this time.
You guys good with that change?
Yeah, so once we're past the lame duck session, are we saying we would re-add those bullets there at that point? Or?
Not necessarily. I mean, I think right now, I'm not sure, I would look to you all to tell us what your preference is. We have indication to think that this may have legs in lame duck. And there is some degree of concern about with the new makeup of the new legislature, how far are they willing to go?
Yeah, it's this struggle between taking the strategy that we've taken consistently of wanting a seat at the table to have a conversation and thereby supporting something and working with it, but also the value of, even though there's a majority across the state to still hear the minority opinion on, what might be good reform or might be good proposal, and whether we should, even if there's smaller chance for political success, it might still be valuable to take that position. But right now, I don't think any of us are prepared to advocate something specifically other than the general tenets that you've done really well to put down,
Yep.
which I think we can all agree to, so.
Yeah, no, I'm with that. I just, those bullets that you listed, I guess I was just wondering if, and I guess now, maybe that's a bit a different question. You mentioned, obviously a lot of these things, will have to be reintroduced in the next
Correct.
legislative period. And as far as this particular piece, there isn't anything on the table right now,
Not that
bill-wise,
we've
speaking to this, though.
They
So-
have kept this one really tight to the vest. We
Yeah, they
can't
have.
get any information. They sure do. They could do this in 3 weeks and get it done, or they could be dragged out for months and months if they go through the more traditional process. I think that's part of and then you also have 40 new members of the legislature. So we'll wait and see. It's one of those where we've heard that it's not just school retirements, they're looking at municipal pensions as well. And I think, and this is not uncommon for a lame duck session, is they will take some of the stickiest, most difficult, politically volatile situations, and they'll push through because they've got the votes.
Well, I
And so-
appreciate the language that you put in there, that's not an appropriate time to take on something of that magnitude.
Yep. So moving on, the next one is SRO top to bottom. You might recall we had your original language, which is that first paragraph where it talks about the rationale and the need to have articulate standards and a process for which we're going to tackle those failing schools. But we thought it was important to add additional language about the reform or elimination of 1280C, which is the law that created the school reform office, that creates the top to bottom list and the requirement for reporting those lowest 5% schools. What we point out in that third paragraph is that there continues to be lack of clarity and transparency about the criteria being used by the SRO to determine which schools are targeted. There's limited to no dollars or support for those schools that are on that 5%. And so there's just a real lack of knowledge and transparency around what the timing of the SRO decisions are, what is the basis behind that decision. And there's a large amount of data that we're reporting, and we're not clear as to exactly how they're using it and how it's going to be used with our teachers and school staff to help elevate the student achievement so these schools are not on that list. And so, as you'll see, it's really felt more like a punitive approach as opposed to a support level approach. And, the vibe we're getting from Lansing is that there is some real openness to wanting to dive in on this, because I think there is that lack of transparency and question mark has led a few of those who actually supported the creation of the EAA and the SRO to say, hey, wait, we should step back and bring a little bit more clarity to
Yeah,
this.
I think that first paragraph is key. Thank you.
Yep.
Isn't it the M-STEP now?
It is.
So you
Where
might
did I-
want to make
oh.
that correction.
Sorry. School vouchers, this language is the same. School calendar, this message is the same. Well, I did add this pre-Labor Day school start is brand new. We decided to chunk that out. And the idea there was, again, to put the board on record as saying that the start of school should be based on the academic needs of students, not the tourism industry. Well, the board is sensitive to those concerns, and those regional economies, there needs to be consistency and uniformity in school calendars. So it could be done on a regional or an ISD basis. That way you don't have a patchwork of 20 different school districts with 20 different school start days and end days. So then those northern Michigan counties or ISDs could in fact choose to maintain a post-Labor Day school start, while someone at Kent ISD, we could do the pre-Labor Day school start. So you'd still have a degree of uniformity, but also a degree of local control. Expanded tenure reform. Let's see, I moved a few of these things. I think I'm on the wrong page here. No, it's the same as we had it before. Charter school transparency with the same as before. Educator evaluation was the same. I'm just trying to look for where I may have, the expansion of, the critical shortage list, there is some new language in there where right now, we would support legislation to expand that. You might recall we were successful in getting that language inserted, but it didn't quite go far enough because we want to, right now, in order for us to use our edu staff and those retired substitute teachers, we're still required to pay that 20.9% in the MIPSR. So we're essentially having to pay into the MIPSR system. It's almost like a double dip, if you will, because they've already paid into it. And so we're saying we should adjust that so that that the districts will not have to bear that additional burden because it makes it
It's rational.
correct. Exactly. Electric choice. This was one where I added. You wanted to add language on there around that 15%. So you'll see right at the very end. All of this is the same as it was before, except for we wanted to put the board on record that you do support language calling for an increase in the percentage of alternative energy required from 10% to 15%. We heard that that was something you wanted to acknowledge. For lame duck, though, it's because the House Dems in particular have been starting to roll on their vote on this, yet they still have not done the correction on this, on the electric choice for schools. So we'd be negatively impacted from a fiscal standpoint unless they hold out votes to ensure that that part of it is fixed. So working with Winnie and David, that will be part of our push with them, this lame duck. Social media, this was added on there, and this was actually something I believe you all had voted on at one point, but somehow did not make it into the platform. And this just simply says the board supports legislation that requires school districts to adopt and implement a policy regarding social media interactions between student and school personnel. You as a board have already adopted that, so we're ahead of the curve. We saw that train was coming down the tracks, and so we've put that in there. We've added the special education seclusion and restraint. This is supporting legislation that would create a more uniform policy of seclusion and restraint in schools, would include but not limited to outlining specific prohibitions, emergency provisions, reporting requirements, creation and implementation of an emergency intervention plan, data collection requirements, and training requirements. This was all part of Lieutenant Governor Kelly's, his special education report. In talking with our educators, there's general support for this. It's a matter of the devil's in the details and how we go about implementing it. We do anticipate these bills will get action this next legislative session, and we're kind of waiting to see the other part of the package. Right now, this is the only main part of the special ed reform package that we've seen. And I'll stop there, and I'm looking to Mo to see if there's anything else there. Okay. It will be more than this, more comprehensive than this at some point, but we have not seen the legislation, so it's a little premature to build it in here, so I just included what we know is out there. Good? It is. Other legislative issues. Just for consistency, under after-school programming, we did add language in there that's consistent with the statewide after-school program association, and I can't think of the name of it right now, but Lynn Heemstra is part of that, and they were looking for the state to match federal 21st century funds. We get about $50 million from the federal government as a pass-through in order to really adequately expand after school. Right now, we're only serving 20% of the students who are eligible. And so the need is greater. We know that it has a positive impact on student attendance, on student achievement, on student graduation rates, on crime between 3 and 6 p.m. So we added that language, and I think Lynn and others know that, of course, you know, our priority number 1 is per pupil. Priority number 2 comes very close with expanded support for at-risk youth and our ELL students and special ed students. So other than that, I updated the teacher. There was a couple little minor updates there, nothing, it was where I took the bill number out. Other than that, the main change would be the last under federal, and this is all new. So what I did here is we literally took directly from the National Association of School Boards. And so what I thought would be is to take the talking points that we do every year at FRN and align it with your platform. So this includes language about implementation of ESSA, and specifically, it's in recognizing that the law's clear directive to restore local governance that provides an opportunity for local school board members for meaningful engagement in the implementation process. We want to make sure we uphold the intent of the law. Second part is the Child Nutrition Act, and this is where where we're joining in as NBSP, and again, supporting the integrity of the process, supporting this Child Nutrition Act to increase flexibility for school districts, and again, meaningfully increase inclusion of the school board's perspective in those policies. I'll just keep going unless, I mean, you can
Yeah.
see this pretty broadly
right.
worded, so it gives us a lot of flexibility. Same thing with career tech, the Perkins Act. And the part that's probably most meaningful is the very last one, where federal education investments, and this is just recognizing the need to maximize the federal investment in special education in particular. And that's really it.
I just want to thank you, John. There was a lot of work this year on revising this and updating it, and you've done a fantastic job. I really, really want to express my appreciation for it.
No, not at all. In fact, we've had several lawmakers and some of the associations say that this is, if anything, it's too exhaustive maybe, but it's one of those where we've had this for years, we've built on it.
Yeah.
So I think it just shows the level of engagement that we have on these issues. And so usually they'll follow the lead of their association. So, but this is, it's pretty comprehensive. And again, we're hands-on on a lot of these things. And in implementing our strategy, these lawmakers are counting on us. They're looking to us because they know we are someone they can turn to without getting a bomb thrown off at them.
Does, go ahead. Does, is there a platform with a talent triangle, or do they just take it as a legislation
They
by
kind of do it
legislation?
piece by piece.
Yeah,
I don't think
right.
there's a formal platform
Okay.
that I've ever seen, but
Okay.
that's something we can ask Chris next
Yeah.
time. Like they have that pension reform. I mean, most of theirs are aligned with ours. Same thing with Talent 2025.
Yeah.
Talent 2025 does have some parts of their platform, so maybe that's at our next meeting, we could revisit that. That would actually probably be good to kind of see how theirs aligns with
Yeah.
ours and just talk it through a little bit.
It would be.
Maybe get
And even
Kevin.
seeing some of the points of difference maybe between talent triangle and our own, if there are any.
Right now, I don't think there are. The only one would be the pension reform at
The
this point.
coding.
And the coding. Your favorite.
It cracks me up.
Julie, will you just remind me that I'm going to invite Kevin Stotts and Chris to come present on their platforms?
Two questions, I guess. One, when you mentioned potentially too exhaustive, I didn't necessarily think too exhaustive, but I did think to myself, some items could get lost in the, because it is pretty exhaustive. So I don't know if it's a question per se, but I guess in my mind as I looked through it, I was just trying to think about how we ensure that the things that are either most important to us, or the things that we think we can most likely influence,
Yep.
how those things sort of rise to the top, I
Yep.
guess, out of this.
I think that's a great conversation. I think we should have it, especially knowing going to this next legislative session. When we have our meeting, and I can't remember the date right offhand, but we have a legislative lunch coming up here in the late, midwinter. Rather than go through all of these with them, it's like, here's our top 3, our top 5 at the most. I mean, I would say right now, we have top legislative priorities, and there's still too many. I mean, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. I mean, there's 15 top legislative priorities. So I agree with you. I think we could maybe take another look at that and scale it back.
Yeah, like I said, and obviously it's all important, but again, my thinking was either when you juxtapose importance versus things that we can really change some perspectives
Yep.
about.
Yep.
Okay, then the only other thing, just going back a bit to that retirement reform piece, and I do like the edits and the language that you offered as far as being particular, regarding not trying to push anything through a lame duck. But I guess I just want a little more clarity. You mentioned that we removed some bullets and bullet points. So kind of going to that whole point of making sure things that we're interested in stand out, a lot of times bullets help. So I'm just wondering, did it have to be either or, that language change and remove the bullets, or, and again, I'm not saying the bullets need to be there because I can't call them all out, but.
This is my 7:30 call to John this morning.
Okay.
Here's where I'm at.
Very cordial.
I think the way that this is written right now, and I think this gives us some flexibility to continue to work with them, especially knowing Talent Triangle does have that position. It's a little bit more nuanced. I think the fact that we talk about the 401K and offering any level of support for it is probably what is kind of caught the attention of some in the education community, because they don't think we should be advocating for that at all. And so if anything, I would argue that we could take time as a committee to study the issue more, assuming that doesn't pass in lame duck, and we have more time to actually look and see, if we did this, how much would it cost the foundation allowance? How much would it impact individual employees? I think that's what's frustrating right now, is that we really don't know or have a comprehensive
Yeah.
understanding of what are those 401K opportunities? How much would it cost employees? What would the local match be?
I would like to see other states' retirement or, pension reforms and their approach, and there's longevity studies already on different options, and it's just, before the bullets, we're supporting current proposed legislation. Now, we're just taking a general position for further vetting.
All right, well, we'll see what happens, basically. See what happens in the next few weeks.
I love that the school funding is upfront, and especially given 8 years ago, when it felt like there was a school funding proposal going through with a little transparency, and now we have a great adequacy study to back up any kind of comprehensive school funding formula reform. So I love it that it's upfront. What is your sense of it being taken up in any time soon?
I guess I would say, based on some of the conversations we've had with the legislature, with the governor's office, with some of those in the 21st Century Commission, there seems to be consensus and at least recognition that the way that we're currently supporting our highest need students is not adequate. And so I believe that there is a desire to do it. I think the governor, to his credit, his increase that investment by $100 million in 31A was a first step.
Yeah, right.
I think the governor's office totally gets it. I mean, if you look at the top 10, we keep talking about top 10 states. Guess what? Massachusetts, Tennessee, Florida, go down the list. They are putting substantially more investment into their at-risk youth and their ELL youth.
That's good
Substantially
news,
more.
because if we look back to initially the proposals for voucher type, anywhere, any place, this is a long way from moving in the right direction, so.
So I think it's great that we have this. It's, the one thing that, again, it's going to come down to the revenue that's in the school aid fund and, how much, additional dollars they may have or don't have. And I think that's where the worry kind of comes, is that it's been such a shell game with the school aid funds for so long that it's still hard to kind of predict what is the real money we have on the table. The money that's, you've got $1 billion every year that's got to go into the MIPSers just to buy down the debt, and that's a smart investment that we need to keep making. Yet there are interest groups out there saying no, that's money that should just go all into per pupil foundation, so that the non-traditionals are also getting access to those dollars. Yet it ignores the liability. The unfunded liability that we're obligated to pay. One way, shape, or form, it's got to get paid. So, again, I think there's so many X factors about pension cost and revenue from the state as to, and how much money is going to go into our higher education, because remember, we're subsidizing higher ed to the tune of almost $1 billion as well.
Right.
So, and there's.
It was never written for.
Correct.
Never written for.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the school aid formula was, Prop A was not intended to form higher ed. That was almost a illegal move, I feel like, but anyway, that's
So
water under the bridge.
we're optimistic because there's conversation heading down that path that people seem to see, hey, we really are studying best practices of top 10 states, and every one of those top 10 states, they had that as part of their plan.
Well, if we don't have any further questions, I have a motion for approval to send to the board tonight.
Make that motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, send it forward. Thanks again, John, for all your work and the last minute changes.
I will go up and make those changes right now, so they actually have a clean copy of the most recent version.
Thanks.
Thank you.